truth to power. You're listening to the Lurie Daniel Favors Show on Sirius XM's Urban View.
XM's Urban View, where talk empowers and becomes action. Today is Wednesday, April the 1st, 2026. Technically April Fool's Day. I know Urban View, you've gotten a lot of April Fool's jokes already from the Urban View Mornings crew. Shout out to Dr. Carr. That first one, that was a real one. I'm still not convinced that the Nick Cannon defense was not also an April Fool's joke, but I'm recording this, this particular conversation slightly before I'm finished with listening to Dr. Carr. So I'm going to have to go back and listen to Urban View Mornings this morning. But Lamont, I heard you, bro. you was doing your best. I appreciate it. And yes, I do think that Cannon might have been trolling, but the joke is on us. So if that's the case, April Fool's on all of us, because yeah, it is so interesting how today's content creators, such as they are, often get a pass in weird ways. Right. Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but we got a lot to get to today. So yes, today is Wednesday, April the 1st. That means our Kwanzaa principle is Kuumba. That is the creativity principle. And it's the principle that says we are to do always as much as we can in the way that we can in order to leave our community more beautiful and beneficial than we inherited it. Welcome back to Black Talk Landia, y'all. Black Talk Landia is the name of this space where we do our best to embody the best in the Black Talk radio tradition. And that means that here we have the difficult conversations about how our world got to be so very messy when it comes to issues of race and gender, culture, identity, politics, and the law. Now, these conversations are very important, even though they're difficult, but they're important because they help us learn how to be better people who learn how to build better communities. And as a result, we are then able to learn how to shape a better world. And for us, that is how talk empowers and becomes action. We got a lot to get to today. In fact, so much that I'm going to go right into our moment of gratitude, because I want to make sure that we have time to sit in the space where we can unpack all the issues that we have to unpack today. Today, while it is, yes, April 1st, is also Census Day. And because it's Census Day, y'all gonna get this census information today. And I know some of you are thinking, wow, we're talking about the census in 2026. Lurie, I thought you always talked about the census as being that governmental survey that doesn't happen until 2030 or some other year ending in zero, like 2020, 2010, 2000. And you are correct. That is when the census takes place. But those of us who do census organizing work, we also know and recognize that, quite frankly, our community has so many rightful reasons to be afraid of the census that if we wait until the census actually starts, it's going to be far too late. So we are kicking off today, Census Day, as it is on every April 1st, but it really starts to get we really start to engage with Census Day in earnest at about this time. At least we at the Center for Law and Social Justice do anyway. So we're going to be talking about that today because I want to make sure that people are aware as to how this very important exercise, the census, which takes place every 10 years, how that exercise is, how it shapes us, how it shapes our community, how it shapes our outcomes. And while, yes, it is probably the least sexy component of democracy, it's a really important component of democracy. In fact, it might be one of the most important components as it pertains to our ability to live anywhere in this country and have our needs met. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that today. And then in the second hour of the show, I got a lot I want to get into. Might even dip into this Nick Cannon conversation a little bit. I'll be very honest with you. I'm still deciding how I'm going to approach that conversation because I think it is a very important discussion, but I want to make sure I do it in a way that is respectful and uplifting. So we got a lot on the agenda, as we always do. And before we get into any of the heavy stories of the day, we also have a ritual on this show called a moment of gratitude. And the reason we have this ritual is because doing this, having the conversations about Black Talk Landia is difficult because Black Talk Landia stories are weighty, right? You can't do race, politics, gender, the law, all those things and not come away feeling a little bit weighed upon. So, and because life just be life, and we recognize that before we get into the meat of our analysis of the news of the day, we really do owe it to ourselves to proactively tap into a space where we can cultivate a sense of joy, gratitude, and appreciation, because we have learned that when we are rooted in joy, gratitude, and appreciation, we cannot also be trapped by fear, loneliness, and depression. So we have a ritual. It is called a moment of gratitude, and it goes a little something like this. In just a minute, y'all are going to hear music. That music is going to be an invitation to you to join the rest of us, because when we hear it, we are going to collectively begin taking the slowest, deepest, most lung capacity expanding, joyful heart invigorating, troubled mind cleansing, and weary soul uplifting, we are going to take the most amazingly juicy breath as we kick off our most important segment of every single day. It is time for our moment of gratitude. Every day, folks, every day we got to do it, and every day it matters. Shout out to the team, Amina and Jonah. Appreciate all of you and the work that you do. Shout out to the Urban View family, the Nubian family, the podcast and YouTube community family. Shout out to the Sankofa Connecting family. I have been loving the way that we have been engaging with each other over in Sankofa Connections, and so I'm grateful for every single one of you. Today, I want to talk about missed opportunities because we often find ourselves in a reality where an opportunity presents itself and we, for whatever reason, don't take advantage of it. We miss out on the opportunity. And then we realize in the aftermath, damn it, that was my opportunity. And for a lot of us, opportunities that are missed are often the sources of our largest regrets, right? When it comes to the opportunities that we did not take advantage of, those often sit in our brain more so than even bad decisions that we had made, right? And so when you've missed an opportunity, it can sometimes feel detrimental, like you've lost the plot, like you're not able to really move forward. And I want you all to take a listen to this clip. This is Lania, the artist, and she's someone who I've played some of her clips before. Just a super extraordinarily encouraging sister. And I think that the way she frames how we should understand what is happening when it comes to an opportunity or a missed opportunity, I think the way she explains it is extraordinarily powerful. I want you all to take a listen to this sister as she does this work. Let's take a listen.
You did not miss your chance. You missed a chance. There's a difference. Yeah. I said it. You did not miss your chance. You missed a chance. You see, this world has a funny thing of coming back around if it keeps on moving, honey. If you want to eventually come into contact with your purpose, with who you're meant to be, birthing the thing that you've always wanted to come out, you gotta keep going. Even if you've had something come into your life and you let it go or you crumbled it because you didn't feel like you were worthy or because of life happening. I don't know your whole story, but what I do know is that you are not only you are life, honey. You are the earth, okay? And if you keep on spinning and if you keep on going, eventually another chance will come back around. I mean, thank God we got spring to look forward to because, oh my goodness, winter has been so cold. But we know and we have faith that spring will come because we know and we have faith that the world continues to move. If you continue to go, a chance will hit you again. I promise you. Keep them vibes high and keep believing in you. And one day you too will have an opportunity come again.
Did you hear that? Did you really hear that? Yes, you might have missed an opportunity, but you did not miss the opportunity. You did not miss the one last chance or last option. That opportunity that for whatever reason passed you by, either because you weren't paying attention to it or because you thought it wasn't quite what it was ended up to be, or whatever the reason might be for the opportunity that you are currently fretting over not manifesting in your experience. Whatever that reason is, what you must know more than anything else is that that opportunity was not the only one. Yes, I'm sure it was an amazing opportunity. I'm sure it was dynamic. And I'm sure you see other people who took advantage of the opportunities and you're a little frustrated and upset right now because I get it and I understand it. And that might make sense if that opportunity were the very last opportunity that you were ever going to get. Sure, I get it. I understand it. But honey, you are the earth. You keep moving, you keep rotating, you are life and life more abundantly. You have the ability to navigate this planet and to keep going. And as you do that, guess what also keeps going? Opportunities keep going in your direction. That last opportunity might have been amazing and it might have been wonderful. And yes, sure, great. It would be wonderful if you could go back in time and take advantage of it, but you cannot. And so the reality is that when we say things like, if it's for you, it's for you. When we say things like, what is for you won't be kept from you, is something that we absolutely have to remember the most when we are in these moments, when it feels like all is lost because we missed out on what we thought was the opportunity. There are other opportunities coming your way. If you are destined for a thing, you are going to manifest the thing. Now, it might not manifest in the way that you had planned on it. It might not manifest in the way that you thought it was going to manifest, but it is indeed going to manifest in some way, shape, or form that is going to be right for you, because the right thing at the wrong time ain't the right thing. And if you are not rightly timed for the thing that you see as an opportunity, then it is not an opportunity that was for you in that moment. I know that's a lot, but if it were for you, you would have taken it. Now, it may be that it was, a missed opportunity in that you chose incorrectly. But guess what? The choosing incorrectly was a lesson that you also have to learn, so that the next time an opportunity of that sort presents itself to you, you will know to take advantage of it. And quite frankly, you will be mature enough to take advantage of it in a way that fully empowers you. My friends, I don't know what it is today that gives you a sense of joy, a sense of gratitude, or a sense of appreciation. But whatever it is, I want you to hold on to it, to cherish and nourish it, and to sprinkle as much of the juicy goodness of it as you possibly can into the lives of other people, because Lord knows we could all use a bit more of it. And that, my friends, is today's moment of gratitude. Every day, folks, every day we got to do it, and every day it matters. We are heading to commercial break. Lots to get into on Census Day. We'll be right back after this. Urban View, where talk empowers and becomes action. We got a lot to get to today, but I'm going to this is a slightly different conversation than the one that we typically have. And it's important that you know that, so that we're setting the right tone, setting the right expectation, because today's conversation is very, very important, although it really has nothing to do with everything that's happening in the world. We're taking a bit of a detour from our world tour around what's happening internationally, what's happening even domestically, with the exception for this one thing. Today is Census Day. The 1st of April is Census Day. Every year it is Census Day. And April Fools, because it's also April Fool's Day. The joke is on you, because this conversation that you're listening to right now is actually pre-recorded. I am right now, if everything has gone the way it's supposed to have gone, at a Census Day presentation. And while I am currently making my way back to the studio, I had to pre-record this because they changed the time of the press conference at the last minute. And I was like, crap, what am I going to do? So that's what's happening right now. And Census Day is a really important day because it's the day when we begin emphasizing the need for New Yorkers and for everybody living in the country to begin organizing early for what might really end up being one of the most challenging census counts that we've ever had in the history of this country. Now, I'm going to need to explain to y'all what the census is, because as soon as Black people hear the word census, it's like, ooh, you the feds. Oh, why are you asking me for all this information? And I get it. It makes sense. I understand that we have an inbred sort of fear about the census. We're going to talk about why that is and why it's quite frankly quite rational for us to feel the way that we feel about the census. But it's important that we understand why the census is a thing and how it works, because us not understanding it is basically contributing to us, quite frankly, being in situations where our communities are underfunded. We don't get the resources that we need. And while, yes, it could be the racism, it is definitely highly likely that it is the whites as the reason as to why we do not have the census or the sorts of resources that we need. It's also the census. And so I want to explain this because it's really important that we're clear that a couple of things, right? Number one, because we did not build this system, we did not construct and design this system, we are essentially trying to figure out how to build freedom in a world that was concocted largely by people who benefit from us not having access to that freedom. And that's really important for us to understand, because a lot of times we blame ourselves for not knowing a thing, or we blame ourselves for not being aware as to what's going on, when really that's not it. What's happening is that this system was designed by people who benefit from us not understanding how this system works. And then those people are basically able to ensure that they're going to continue profiting and benefiting in ways that frankly are at the detriment to the rest of us. Okay, so let's get into this a little bit, because this is one of those areas where it's not sexy. Like, the census is probably the least sexy part of democracy, but it is also one of the most important parts of democracy, because it is literally tied to political power and to the money that our communities either get or do not get, largely is based on the census. So when you think about how this country was formed, the white people who created it had a couple of things that they wanted to do. One of the first things they wanted to do was to figure out how they were going to distribute political power and how they were going to distribute resources, right? And the reason this was important is because you got to think about it. These were white people who came from Europe. They came from kings and queens. They came from like monarchies, and they were trying to create this system known as a democracy that, quite frankly, ain't nobody had created this before in the way that the whites were creating it. Now, to be sure, white Americans they're not the first ones to come up with democracy. We have a number of African indigenous communities that had what would largely be considered democratic societies. The Iroquois nation, the nation of 5 tribes that the Europeans first came in contact with, they already had concepts of democracy. So the Europeans are not the first ones to come up with this, but they're the first to do it in the way that was trying to simultaneously distribute political power while creating a system based on freedom, because they wanted to be free from the king and from the power of the monarchy, but they did not want freedom for Black people. They did not want freedom for Black people. And because of that, their democracy is fugazi, and it's been basically fucked up from the beginning. And that's one of the reasons why we have to understand how the census operates. So when the founders were creating the country after, the Revolutionary War, they're coming together, they're trying to create the country. They decided to use total population count as the way to distribute political power. Now, the reason that matters is because total population count, you got to understand how are you getting the numbers? Where are you getting the numbers as to where, what's your population is, and they get those numbers from the census. And the reason that that's important is because when you understand how population count is also tied to political power, you realize that when we don't fill out the census, we end up in situations that, quite frankly, we play ourselves. We play ourselves a lot. So let's break down how this operates. And I'm going to try to make sure that I'm getting you all. Let's see. Hold on. Let me get back to my notes. Okay, here we go. So when it comes to their decision to base everything on total population count, that's actually not a bad idea, because communities that have a smaller population should not be receiving the same amount of resources as communities with larger demographics. And larger communities should not be restricted to the smaller budgets that are more appropriate for smaller neighborhoods. And so the census is basically a survey that the government requires us to take every 10 years, and it's required by the Constitution. And this is a survey that's basically designed to answer 2 main questions. Number one, how many people live in your community, and what are your needs? Like, so all the people who live there, what do y'all need? And by that, I mean, that, for example, if you live in a community where the population is 75% of people who are over the age of 70, and only 25% of people who are under the age of 40 or below, and I know those numbers are weird, but just go with it for today, then you are going to need a whole lot more resources for geriatric patients than you're going to need, for example, let's say preschools. You're going to need buses and transportation systems that can accommodate walkers and wheelchairs and other accoutrement of aging. And you're not going to really need a whole bunch of preschool playgrounds, because you only have a small population that is of the preschool playground age. So the census would basically tell the government that when it comes to distributing resources to your community, you need about 25% of your resources that are going to be geared towards people with small children, and 75% of your resources that are going to be aimed at older populations. And we're going to get into that a little bit more in a minute, because this really has huge implications for Black people in our communities. So since we're talking about Black people, I want to also talk about census fear. And the reality that, quite frankly, whenever I start talking about the census in Black communities, I have to start by acknowledging that we have a very twisted and tortured relationship with the census. And you know how we always say that Black people make up like 13% of the population, but we all be like, we know we make up more than that, but they always say we at only 13% of the population. Well, that 13% of the population number is based on the percentages of Black people who fill out the census as compared to the numbers of people who are filling out the census from other communities. So if more of us filled out the census, then we would be able to get a more accurate depiction as to our actual numbers when it comes to population count. But there are very good reasons for why Black people do not like to fill out the census. And I want to go over that because when you don't understand the way or why people move the way that they move, then the solutions you try to reach are going to be ineffective. And I remember there is an elder when we were doing the last census cycle at the Center for Law and Social Justice. There was this elder who was in his 70s. And I know he was in his 70s because he came up to me after I did my presentation and he was like, I'm in my 70s. I have several master's degrees. I'm a highly intelligent Black man. I never knew that this is all that the census was responsible for. I had no idea. I have never filled out the census. I have been afraid of the census. I've had people tell me that they chased census takers. They're called enumerators. They would chase the census enumerators out of their community because they thought that they were the feds. And again, that makes perfect sense because when it comes to Black people, like the census is basically you giving over information to the federal government about who lives in your household. And I'm not even going to hold you. The census is going to ask you for some key pieces of information, like the names of the people who live in your household, the birth dates of the people who live in your household. And quite frankly, Black people, for a very good reason, are not trying to really give over all that personal information, especially to strangers, and especially in this day and age. And because I work in New York City, Black families here often also have an added complication because we will have families that sometimes have a mixed status as it pertains to immigration in New York City. Not everybody, but certainly enough people who live here. It's something that we have to be aware of when we're doing any of our census outreach and education and organizing. And so our families definitely do not want to be giving out information about who lives where. And all of that makes perfect sense. And I got to say that because a lot of times when it comes to doing this organizing work, people who are not familiar with how our communities roll are often some of the most judgmental. And that creates a lot of difficulty when it comes to us being able to be effective at being able to actually get our people to change their behaviors and engage more in doing the work. So I just want to say that so that we're crystal clear that there are factual reasons that we're going to go over them now, because it is important that we, one, don't blame ourselves for something that's not our fault. But two, if we don't understand how these systems operate, then we will perpetually be locked out of getting access to the resources that we need. So when you think about it, right? If the census is a survey where the government is asking you information, think about what was happening, let's say 400, 500 years ago, when strangers who look like the white feds that we have to deal with today, when these strangers came to town, it was often that they were arriving with gunfire. They were often arriving with an intention to steal half the village and to sell our ancestors into slavery. You might have been out that day minding your African business 1 minute, and then in a flash, you could find yourself surrounded by white strangers who were demanding to know how many people were in your community so that they could meet their quotas on the slave catching hunt. And if it's a couple, if it's like 300 years ago, when strangers come knocking at your door, demanding to know who was inside and demanding to know where everybody was at, then half your family, which was enslaved, might end up being sold away the next day. Or if you were a group of runaway enslaved Africans, you might find that half of you had been kidnapped and sold back into slavery. And we can bring it even closer, right? In the early 1900s, when these strangers from the government came banging at the door, looking like white folks look, it very easily could have been social services coming to see if there was a man living in the house, if there was more than one adult living in the house. And if so, then that would have been a threat to your ability to get access to welfare benefits, or to, it could expose you to having cases opened up about you, alleging that you were neglecting your children. And frankly, we don't even have to go back that far. Just a few years ago, we all experienced viscerally what happened to Breonna Taylor when strangers who came knocking at her door demanded information about who was inside. And basically any of us could end up dealing with that fear, could end up being fearful of being shot as we're roused from our sleep, the way that Breonna Taylor was, due to a faulty no-knock warrant and trigger happy police. So not wanting to open the door to strangers and not wanting to give strangers information about who lives in your household makes perfect sense for Black people when we think about it. But our challenge is to know this history and not be trapped by it, right? Like our challenge is rather to understand how the systems that distribute resources in the society actually work so that our people are not trapped by that history, but instead can be liberated by it and use this knowledge and information to empower our ability to get the resources. So when we're talking about this survey, and again, I know this is the least sexy part of democracy. I understand it, but because this is Census Day, y'all gonna get this census information, okay? Because we're gonna fill out this census in 2030. And I know some of y'all are thinking, why on earth are we talking about the 2030 census when it's 2026? Because, and you're gonna hear me say this several times, our communities rely on getting access to this information multiple times. We require multiple touch points. We're not good with just one touch point because this system is foreign to us. We did not create this system. This system is not something that we designed. In fact, it was designed on our backs. And so we need more information. We need people to connect with us more. Our community responds better when we have a number of folks who are reaching out to us and making sure that we are aware of what's happening. So my goal between now and 2030 is that y'all will have heard me talk about the census so much that your pastors will be giving you census information before they even get started. You're going to hear about the census in your announcements at the church. And your imams are going to tell you all about the census and make sure that you have a census form distributions drop in the mosque. We're going to make sure that our African braiders and our barbershops and our hair salons, that people are so familiar with the census. By the time I get through, if I've done my job, we are going to have an 80% at least census completion rate, which would be amazing. I know y'all are like 80%. That's so low. Child, wait, keep listening. When I tell you how few of us fill out the census, you're going to understand why I would be thrilled if we had an 80% census rate. Again, not for all communities, but for the ones that I'm talking to us. So when we're talking about the census, as I mentioned, right, this is basically just a governmental survey that's designed to answer two basic questions about who is in your community, like how many people live in your community, what is your population count, and what are your needs. And part of the reason this is so important is because one of the main things that the census is responsible for is for providing your communities, all of our communities, they give that total population count to the federal government so the federal government can figure out how much money to give your community. And when I say how much money, I am talking billions of dollars that go towards helping our communities get all of their needs met. I'm going to be sharing with you this. I know the chart looks very antiquated, but it is a chart that basically explains how the census works. Okay. I get it. I understand not everybody likes my census charts, but it is important that you are aware as to how the money flows, because when you understand how the money flows, then we can be more intentional about how we're organizing. And if we're not intentional about how we're organizing, you are going to see by the time I get done with this conversation, the way that our lack of organization ends up with our communities really struggling and considering what we are going to be facing when it comes to the way that we organize, or not even so much the way that we organize, when it comes to what we are going to be facing with regards to the way that our communities are being underfunded. It is so vitally important that we are aware as to how to fight back, because they are going to require us to fight back, because they are canceling resources, canceling programs, canceling funding, left, right, and center. Left, right, and center. And so it's important that we understand how these systems operate. So y'all gonna have to look at this antiquated chart. I know I could do an updated chart, and I will at some point. I just ain't got time to do that right now because I need to make sure we understand what is happening with the daggone census. All right. So Census Bureau, every 10 years, the Census Bureau attempts to count every person living in the United States. And this count determines how much money the government receives to pay for the following services. So the government, your state and your local government, gets money, billions of dollars from the federal government every year for housing, schools, hospitals, subways, healthcare programs, food programs, all types of after-school programs, teachers. When I say healthcare programs, I'm talking about nurse training programs. I'm talking about resources for your hospital. I'm talking about clinics. When it comes to your education systems, I'm talking about after-school programs and before-school programs and lunch programs that have actual healthy food as opposed to counting ketchup as a vegetable. When it comes to libraries, when it comes to the potholes in your community, the transportation, the public transportation, all of those dollars that your community gets for those resources is based in some way on your total population count as reported in the census. And so when you look at this chart and you consider the fact that every 10 years, the government is required to get access to this information and then required to use that information about how many people live in your community for the purposes of giving you money for these things. Think about all of the ways that our community relies upon these things and then ask yourself, can we afford to leave money on the table? Can we afford to leave power on the table? Now, a lot of people will say, well, Lurie, the government sends me a tax return, or the government knows where I live because they take money out of my paycheck every week. Why do they need me to fill out this census in order to understand how many people in my household? They know how many kids I got. They know where my kids go to school. Yes, all of this is true. The government does have all of that information, but the reason that does not matter is because according to the Constitution, in order to give your community resources for all of these things, they have to use the census. And so I know it's some bullshit, but listen, white people created this system, and you know what? They shit. All right. We just live in here trying to figure it out. It's the white people system. So we damn well better understand how it operates. And so when you see with that chart, once the government understands how many people live in your community, then they can determine how much money you're going to get. And again, money for schools, for transportation, for hospitals, for grocery stores, for job training programs, for housing programs, for education, libraries, banks versus check cashing institutions. And speaking of which, you should also know that it's not just the government that uses this data. Corporations are using census data to determine what sorts of investments they should make in your communities. If I am Saks Fifth Avenue, I am going to examine census data to make sure that I am not putting up a Saks Fifth Avenue in the middle of a community that cannot afford to even walk into that store, let alone actually be able to buy something off the shelf. And if I'm Family Dollar or Dollar General, I'm going to be looking at census data to make sure that I'm not putting one of my stores in a community that would never know what a Family Dollar or a Dollar General is, because the people in the family don't actually do their own grocery store shopping because the maid and the hired help takes care of that. And so I want to talk now just a little bit about census formulas, because they basically will take that total population count of people in your community, and then they just plug it into formulas. And those formulas tell them how much money you're going to get. And they don't care if if your census count for your total population is only a fraction of what it actually is. If you did not fill out the census for the purposes of this exercise, you do not exist. For the purposes of the government, you do not exist. So remember how I said earlier, if you live in a community with 75% of old people, you're going to need a different set of resources than a community that's got 75% of a population under the age of 25. Again, in an older population, you're going to need those buses that will raise and lower for those wheelchairs. And you're going to need healthcare services for geriatric populations. And you're going to need doctors and medical training programs for people who understand how to treat that particular age group. And conversely, if you got a bunch of strollers and after school programs because you got like a 75% population of kids under, the age of 5, then your population is going to be very young, and the government will instead give you money targeted towards that. So let's explore this for just a minute, because I think it's really important how we recognize how this is shaping outcomes in our community today. Because yes, sometimes it's the racism, but sometimes it's just a matter of us not knowing and understanding how to get the money. So let's say, hypothetically, you live in a community of 100 families. Some of y'all have heard me give this example before. And each family in that community has one child. That means there are 100 children in this community. And let's say, according to the census formulas from the federal government that year, in order to provide an adequate education for a community of this size, every family in that community is going to receive $100 per child for their education needs, their annual education needs. And yes, these numbers are totally fugazi. I know you need more than $100 to educate a child. I'm just using simple numbers because y'all know how I feel about math. We are trying to get reacquainted with each other. We ain't there yet. The Lord is still working on me in math. Okay. So you got 100 children in this community. And according to the census formulas for this community, and let's give the community a name. Let's say the community's name is Black Talk Landia. Okay. And in Black Talk Landia, we have 100 families, and each of those families have one child. That means there are 100 children in Black Talk Landia. And according to the census formulas for that year, for that decade, communities of this size are going to get $100 per child for that child's education needs for an academic year, which means if everyone in Black Talk Landia fills out the census, we are going to get $10,000 a year because 100 families with 100 children times $100 per child, that's $10,000. Okay. So let's say everybody in Black Talk Landia fills out the census, we get our $10,000. Our Black families and their children get a lovely education. It's exactly what they need, even though we know it's probably not going to be all that they need because the federal government is always trying to do shit on the cheap. But we know that according to the federal government, these Black children in Black Talk Landia are going to get the resources that they need for education. However, let's say instead of all the families in Black Talk Landia filling out the census, let's say only 40 families fill out the census. And I'm saying 40 families because there are many, 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 many Black communities where barely 40% of the community is filling out the census. Again, for good reason, we understand it. We're not judging. We listen and we don't judge, but we also got to explain how our lack of knowledge is destroying us. Okay. So if 40 families in Black Talk Landia fill out the census, then that means Black Talk Landia is only going to get $4,000 for that school year for their education funds, because 40 families times $100 is $4,000. And I know this is correct because I did the math ahead of time to make sure I did not embarrass myself in front of all of y'all listening to me right now in Urban View. So instead of getting that $10,000, Black Talk Landia is going to get $4,000 to educate a community of 100 children, even though we all know that $4,000 is only adequate to educate 40 kids, but all 100 families are going to send their children into that school system come September, and all 100 of those children are going to have to get educated. So yeah, they're going to get educated to the best that those teachers can do on a budget that is only appropriate for 40 children. They're going to try to educate those kids, but you got to think about it. That $4,000 isn't just trying to meet their basic needs. It's also going to have to meet the special education needs. It's going to have to meet the needs of the children who require additional services. It's going to have to meet the education needs of all the children who are coming into that school system and who are going to need additional support. And so clearly we can understand how, yeah, it is often the racism, okay, often, but sometimes it's simply a function of us not having access to the resources that we need in order to get our communities where it is that they have to go. All right, so let me turn back to my notes. So thinking about it this way, when you think about the fact that the census is, or when you think about the fact that our resources are impacted by the census, and the resources that we either get or don't get in our communities is directly connected to whether or not we're filling out the census, that's just the money side of this aspect. There's also the political power side of this, and that's one of the things that is so important in this day and age. And I'm lying. Frankly, I was going to say that the political side is probably the most important side, but I frankly can't even say that because all of it matters. Like all of it matters. There's not one that's more, the money and the power. The census is about money, power, and respect. Like money, power, and respect. And if you're going to get the money and you don't get the power, you ain't going to get the respect, not the respect of other communities, but you're not even going to be able to respect yourself because you're not going to be able to meet your own needs. And so when we think about the political power side of this, it's almost, again, yeah, it is as important as the money side. So let's move into this political side, because I think this is also one of the parts that, again, not very sexy. Right? This is not a sexy conversation, but it is a conversation that is literally the difference between, frankly, life and death for our communities. And I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm being deadly serious, which is one of the reasons why I'm at this daggone press conference right now. So when it comes to the political power distribution, you know how every single state, how you've got 2 senators. Every single state, there are 2 senators for every single state. So it doesn't matter if you are a largely populated state like California, Texas, or New York, or you are a sparsely populated state like Vermont, Rhode Island, or some of the smaller states. Every state gets 2 senators. But every state does not get the same number of representatives in Congress, right? So remember, we've got 2 houses of government. You've got the Senate. And again, every state gets how many senators in the Senate? 2 senators, which means there are 100 senators altogether, comprised of 2 senators from each state. But on the other side of the government, we also have the House of Representatives. And there are 435 members of the House of Representatives. And that number, or should I say, the number of representatives that you get in your state is based on the total population count by the census. So if your communities are also not filling out the census, then not only are you not going to get your fair share of dollars to go to support every single one of the social service programs that our communities rely upon, but you're also not going to get the correct number of political representatives. And we experienced this a lot in New York. In the state of New York, during our Census 2020 count, this is one of the reasons why I was so angry at Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo sat on a pot of money, $20 million, that he was supposed to distribute to community-based organizations and faith-based organizations to make sure that we got out the census count. And I always tell this story because I take it personally, because these motherfuckers asked me, Lurie Daniel Favors, to introduce the governor and basically vouch for him to the community that this man was going to give us the money. That man did not give out the money until the very last minute, so much so that it ended up sabotaging so many efforts for people who were trying to get the census count out. As a result of that, New York lost a congressional representative. We went from 28 congressional representatives to 27 congressional representatives because we fell 89 census forms short. That man sat on that money after my black ass vouched for him. And if we had only gotten 89 more forms, we would have been able to keep our additional congressional representative. Now, you might be thinking, why do you care about having a congressional representative? Everybody has a representative, like you should be fine. Here's the reason why this matters. Let's go back to Black Talk Landia, right? And let's say that hypothetically, according to those census formulas again, and yes, these are hypothetical numbers, but just work with it. Let's say you got 100 families in your community, and according to the census formula for that year, a community of 100 families gets 10 congressional representatives. Yes, this is fugazi ass numbers, but just go with it because it's simple enough for me to get. And if it's simple enough for me to get it, then I'm sure everybody else will be able to get it too. So you're supposed to have 10 congressional representatives, right? If all 100 people in your community fill out the census. And those 10 political representatives are going to be 10 votes that you would then be able to have for policy decisions. And those policy decisions include things like, what sort of education do you want to have in your school? Right? Like what sort of access to healthcare do you want to have in your community? What sorts of job training programs do you want to have? What sorts of housing programs do you want to have? And if you had 10 votes, then you could have a real impact when those 10 elected officials go to the nation's capital and they get to debate and negotiate with representatives from across the country. And if you've got those 10 votes locked in, then you can really move legislation very powerfully. However, if only 40 of the families in your state fill out that census, then that means you're only going to get 4 political representatives because 40 families, according to the census formula, only get 4 political representatives. So when your elected officials have to go to Congress to fight for you and to debate about policies for you, and instead of having 10 votes that can help decide what sort of job programs or education programs or housing programs or food programs or school programs that your community wants and needs, instead of having 10 votes to help you get the sorts of policies that you want, you're only going to have 4, which means you're 6 votes down, you're 6 votes short because 60% of your population did not fill out the census. And another way that we can see how this impacts us is when you look at the 3/5 clause. And I know some of y'all is like, what the hell? We are talking about the census in 2030. How did you go back to slavery? Everything is about slavery. Everything is about slavery. And the 3/5 clause and the census is also about slavery. So the first time Black people show up on the census, I think it was the 1790 census. And one of the main questions were, how were the whites who had just fought a revolutionary war, a war where they were declaring themselves free from the power of a king, how are the whites going to count the Blacks on the census? Because remember, up until that point, white people who owned large numbers of African people, they wanted to be able to have the legal right to do anything to those African people. Part of what made slavery work was that white people who owned African people fought for and got legislation, laws passed that basically said Black people had no rights, that white people had to respect. Black people were basically not even considered human. They were considered property. And that gave white people the right to do anything they wanted to them. Anything at all. You could rape them. You could pillage them. You could plunder them. You could violate them. You could force them to have your children. You could keep them enslaved. You could torture them. Anything that you wanted to do, you had the right to do to them, because up until that point, white people had been saying Black people are not actually human beings. They're no more human than a dog. And we love our dogs, so we love our N-words too. Okay, they did not. But they were basically spending all of this time arguing about the fact that and advocating for the right to be able to treat Black people as they wanted. And so when it came time to count them for the census, people who were either opposed to slavery or who only owned a few Black people and did not want people who owned a lot of Black people having all the political power, basically said, wait a minute, you've been talking about the fact that Africans are not even human. How is it that you are now trying to count them for the census as if they were actually human beings? Either they're humans or they're cows. Either they're humans or they're barn doors. Either they're humans or they're chickens. But you can't say that they are people who are not actually people and have no rights so that you can brutalize and violate them and do whatever you want to them. And then, oh, but by the way, they're going to be people when it comes time for us to have a total population count because we want more political power. So because the whites could not figure out how to deal with the problem, they came to a compromise. And the compromise was the 3/5 compromise. And I know that when this 3/5 compromise is taught in schools, it's often taught as if white people had a quandary about whether or not Blacks were human. These motherfuckers knew good and goddamn well that we was human. We was human enough to rape. We was human enough to talk to have thoughts with, to have conversations with, to engage with. We were very, very human. This was not about our humanity. It was about how white people were committed to a system that basically was going to allow them to be as diabolical as they wanted to be and still be able to claim political power behind it. That's really all it was. That's really all it was. And so when you think about the 3/5 clause being the first time that we see Black people show up on the census, now let's talk about the way that race and Black people show up on the census today. Because when it comes to the census, there is this thing that we have to talk about when it comes to race. Now, we've been talking about race a lot. We talk about race every single day on this show. But race, when it comes to the census, is also very, very, very important. And this is where I'm really having a conversation with the part of the community, the Urban View community, that quite frankly is like the Dominican Mino Black community, the part of the community that you are a person who immigrated to the United States, but you do not identify as a Black American. I'm not mad at you for not identifying as a Black American, because being a Black American is a racial ethnic category. And when you are someone who looks Black and who is racialized as Black, growing up in another country, and you come here, you may not understand that you are Black until you've been here for a while, because in your country, you are not Black. I know Black Americans, this feels very, very weird, but when you consider the fact that 90% of the enslaved Africans who came to the Western Hemisphere were not enslaved in the United States of America, the reality is there are a variety of ways that racial identity works. And whereas here, for example, we have like the one drop rule that says 1 drop of Black blood makes us Black. Well, in other countries, in some countries, having 1 drop of white blood gives you access to whiteness, right? There are some countries where your racial category is also a function of your finances and your economic class, which is to say you might look like Black Michael Jordan, but if you got Michael Jordan money, you're going to be treated like white Michael Jordan, right? Because they have concepts called like blanqueamiento, the whitening of the race in certain Latin American countries. And so when you come here, you may not know that you are Black. And even if you know that Black people exist, you do not identify as American. And being a Black American is a specific ethnic racial identity. And this is why the understanding the difference between race and nationality and ethnicity really, really matters. So, for example, your ethnicity might be Yoruba, your nationality might be Nigerian, and your race is Black. Those are all 3 very different categories. They're connected, but they're different. Your ethnicity might be Southern Black American. I know we don't often think about ethnicity with different groups of Black people, but there are different groups of Black people, even within Black America. So your ethnicity might be a Southern Black person. Your nationality is American, and your race is Black. Right. So these categories don't operate the same everywhere. And in the United States, what is so important for people who immigrate to this country to understand is that race operationalizes differently here under a legal framework that you really need to understand, because race is a protected category, or at least it was before the white nationalists came into office. But assuming the white nationalists don't hold on to power, because people are not going to lose their minds and will thereby vote effectively in November and throughout the midterms, at some point the country is going to attempt to return to normal and or at least an effort to rebuild in the aftermath. And assuming that race is still a protected racial category, and let me just say, technically, it is still a legally protected racial category. It just doesn't feel that way because the white supremacists be white supremacy, or should I say the white narcissists be white narcissism. We're trying not to call them supreme. But the idea that for foreign-born people who look Black, and you know you're a foreign-born person who looks Black, if you are pulled over by the police and before the police hear your name or hear your accent, they would say that you're Black. If you look like a Black, even though you don't identify as a Black, for the purposes of the census, I need you to check Black. Black? Because race is one of the other questions that they have on the census. What is your racial category? Now, this is very important because, again, there's a lot of diaspora wars, and the diaspora wars do not work in your favor on the census, in any of our favor. So keep in mind that I don't mind people going to like Ancestry.com or African Ancestry and finding out, who their ancestors are and where they come from. And you might say that, I got a Jamaican heritage and I got Nigerian heritage and Kenyan heritage. You might have all the heritages. You might have 11 different heritages. Baby, I want you to get a flag. I want you to put a flag for all your different heritage and your nationalities out on your wall. I want you to get bumper stickers. You can put bumper stickers for every single one of the countries represented in your 23andMe report and put it all over your car. But for the census, you need to check Black. You need to check Black. There are resources. If I'm going into court and I'm advocating on behalf of people who are being discriminated against, I have to be able to say how many Black people live in this community. If you are, if I'm the Center for Disease Control, before it was the days of the Center for Disease Control being controlled by the man who was, quite frankly, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, RFK Jr. If I am looking for populations to be able to provide medical resources for populations that are dealing with diabetes, prostate cancer, hypertension, chances are Black communities are going to be one of the communities I look at because diabetes, hypertension, and prostate cancer are issues that Black people tend to deal with when we live together in large clusters. And so if you're not checking Black, I can't give you the medical research that's going to be specifically targeted to your need as a Black person. If I'm studying sickle cell and nobody in your community is identifying as Black, or only a portion of your population is identifying on the census, I can't send you the resources for the sickle cell. So you might identify as 11 different things, but on the census, you have the ability to indicate both your race and your nationality. And you need to do that, but you better check Black because you is going to be living a Black ass life in Black ass communities without resources if we are not moving a lot more intelligently when it comes to the census. And so it's also important that we understand that we got to move differently when it comes to this thing, because our communities do not relate to the census in the same way. And that matters a lot because the way white people respond to the census and the way Black people respond to the census, my friends, are not at all the same thing. And I need us to understand that and be aware of it, because the way that they move with the census allows them to navigate the world with power, political and resource power. And we're going to unpack that on the other side. We're going to hold it here. Much more to come on the Lurie Daniel Favors Show. We'll be right back.
Sunday lineup.
We tackle tough issues head on.
8 a.m. East. It's For Your Soul with Reverend Dr. DeForest Soaries.
The spiritual portion of Urban View. I invite you to join me every week and pray that you will be empowered by For Your Soul.
Then at 9 a.m. East, it's Sunday Civics.
Hey there, it's L. Joy Williams, host of Sunday Civics. We demystify politics and learn from leaders who are making a difference every day.
For Your Soul, Sunday Civics, part of the Urban View Sunday lineup. The Women Empowerment Network and Sirius XM invite you to a new podcast, Lurie Breaks It Down.
I'm Lurie Daniel Favors, and on Lurie Breaks It Down, we connect the dots on the topics that matter. We dive deep into the stories, the ideas, and perspectives that shape our world.
Lurie Breaks It Down, hosted by Lurie Daniel Favors. Available now wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget, follow the show so you never miss an episode.
Don't just scratch the surface. Break it down with me.
Community.
Power. Culture. Making a difference. It's home. Urban View is home. The undeniable force of truth.
Urban View.
The center of all things for me, of our knowledge. It's the centering of our culture. It's power.
Channel 126 isn't just radio. It's a space where voices lead and real change begins to move the culture forward and community listens.
Urban View is where we cultivate the foundation for community empowerment.
Boots on the ground in the community, making a difference.
It's community, education, connection.
Urban View is where you come when you want to grow as a person.
Here is where we harness the power of knowledge, gratitude, and joy.
Urban View is unfiltered conversation.
The most amazing conversations that I've never heard anywhere else. Urban View.
To inspire, uplift, and most importantly, planting the seeds necessary for our growth.
Urban View.
Where talk empowers
And becomes action.
Sirius XM Channel 126 and the Sirius XM app.
I lost myself, trying to prove I'm strong. But healing taught me strength wasn't moving on. I forgave some folks who ain't treat me right. right. That's a win for my soul, not a weakness to fight. Now I walk in peace with my head held high. No bitterness left, just a clearer sky. Every tear I cried, wanted something new. Now I'm blooming in the light like survivors do by nature.
Welcome back. Welcome back. You are listening to Lurie Daniel Favors on SiriusXM's Urban View, where talk empowers and becomes action, where we remain thankful by nature. We are talking Census Day because I am still at a press conference where we are advocating for resources to be put into census organizing so that our communities are prepared for the census cycle that's coming. And I know, as I said previously, a lot of people are like, why are you talking about the census in 2026 when the census is in 2030? That's because history and data and research let us know that when we don't start years in advance, our community is undercounted. And we've already talked a little bit about the ways in which being undercounted on the census can devastate our communities. And when it comes to all of the social service programs that we relate to. But I also want to talk about this thing that happens because with the census, you can leave power on the table. You can leave resources on the table because we've already uncovered or reviewed the way that the census is tied to coming up with the total population counts for your community. And those total population counts determine how many congressional representatives you get and how much money you get when it comes to resources for the people who are in need of these resources. And those resources, again, education dollars, healthcare dollars. I've said it ad nauseum, so I'm going to assume that y'all remember it, but it really does matter. But the fact of the matter is when Black people don't fill out the census, we leave power and resources on the table. And that's because white people have a very different cultural relationship to the census. And they often are overcounted on the census, and our communities are often undercounted on the census. And some communities are overcounted, which is to say they're overrepresented. And when that happens, they get the ability to overconsume more than their fair share of the resources. So I just want to introduce you to two families. The first is a white family, and this is the Bradys. Now, the Bradys live in a multi-family home. They've got grandparents, and it is multi-generational. They've got grandparents in the home. They've got parents in the home and some aunts and uncles and some children. It's a large house, and they've got a couple of kids who live on some college campuses. And when it comes time for this white family, which has a very close and loving relationship with the government, and frankly, I'm being a little facetious, but even if white people are mad at the government, they do not have a multi-century history of the government basically destroying their capacity to get shit. And they know that when they submit information to the government, that they get information, they get resources, they get a whole bunch of things. And so they're not dealing with the same cultural hangups that the rest of us have. And so because of that, when it comes time to fill out the census, Mrs. Brady is going to make sure to mention that it's census time at the dinner table. And they're going to probably have a rousing conversation about what the census is and why it's the family's duty to make sure that they're all represented. And Mr. Brady is going to make sure to call their students who live on college campuses or in apartments off campus to make sure that they fill out their census forms as well, because they are coordinating, or at least they're going to try to coordinate to make sure that those children are going to fill out the census because that's their role as parents. Mrs. Brady and Mr. Brady and the aunts and uncles in the Brady family are going to also make sure to count everyone who's staying at the summer home, and they're going to count the hired help that occasionally spend the night to ensure that when the Bradys go to their summer vacation, that they're as cared for there as they are in their own house. They're going to make sure to count every single person living in the household, grandparents, parents, all the aunts and uncles, all the children, all the cousins, even the friends and people who might be couch surfing at their home at any given moment. And because of that, largely what's going to end up happening is their community is going to be overrepresented on the census, which means they are going to get more than their fair share of all of those resources for schools, hospitals, banks, housing programs, after-school programs, sports programs, and so on and so forth. What also happens is when they integrate into our communities, they bring their census-loving cultures with them. So you might have a very Black community that is being heavily gentrified, but because the gentrifiers fill out the census and the old-time residents don't fill out the census, largely, again, I'm speaking in generalities, then those newcomers are going to be able to get dog parks because the newcomers are from Wisconsin and they need a dog park for the dogs. And they're going to fill out the census and they're going to talk about what their needs are on that census. And your child's dilapidated playground is going to be converted into a dog park because Susan and Abatha and Becky decided to fill out the census and report that the three of them have 10 dogs living in their apartment. I'm joking because you don't actually talk about your pets on the census, but that's not the point. I'm trying to make a point. The point is they are going to carry their culture of being responsive to government with them. So even when they come into our communities, they end up being able to inadvertently use the census to empower them to get access to what it is that they need. And we don't have the ability to do the same thing. Wrong. That's not right. We do have the ability to do the same thing. We just often choose not to do it. So there's that. But let's think about another neighborhood. Let's think about the neighborhood that the Jackson family lives in. And just like the Bradys, the Jacksons are a multi-generational family, and they live in a multi-unit household. And although this is a family that's done very well for themselves, they are a Black family, which means they have a very different cultural relationship with the American government. And they're definitely not going to show up on the census in the same way. And if the census is mentioned in the Jackson household at all, it might be between mom and dad or parents, but it's certainly not going to be something that's discussed in any significant way at most Black dinner tables. And if it does come up, it's often the source of jokes where family members are talking about not wanting to give the government all that information in the first place. Now, Mrs. Jackson is probably going to fill out the census form for she and her husband, and yes, I'm being very stereotypical here. It could be Mrs. Jackson and Mrs. Jackson. It could be Mr. Brady and Mr. Brady. I'm just being stereotypical for the sake of ease, because I've already spent a lot of time talking about this, and I really want to make sure I get to all these points. But Mr. and Mrs. Jackson, they might fill out the census form, but they're going to lean away from counting all the children who are staying at the household, especially her sister's kids who are staying at the household while her sister figures things out and gets them together, because they don't want to give the government all that information. Mr. Jackson is not going to want to count a lot of the family members staying in the basement, because he's worried that the government's going to know that there are extra people living in the property. Even though they own their own home, they are still scared of giving this information to the government. And while they might have several students who are away at college, ain't nobody picking up the phone to remind those students that they need to fill out the census, and no one is going to consider including those children on the census family form, because the family, quite frankly, is not even certain if they're going to submit the form anyway. So instead of filling out a census form with all the grandparents and the parents and the children and the aunts and the cousins and the uncles, everybody who lives in that home, the Jacksons are basically, they might fill out a census form that's got half of the family represented, which means that their entire community, if the whole community is filling out the census with this same sort of cultural approach, that community ain't going to get shit when it comes to what they need in terms of getting their resources. And every single person in that Jackson household is now going to have a lesser ability to get access to the resources that they need, largely because the family did not fill out the census and they live in a community that did not fill out the census. And that is going to directly impact every single aunt, uncle, grandparent, grandchild, parent that is living in that household. And when you think about it, in that way, it really is significant that we restructure our relationship to this governmental function. Because if you think about, if your child is let's say it's the year of the census, it's 2030, and your child is 5 years old, that census locks you into those funding formulas for 10 years. You're not going to get an adjustment to those funding formulas until 2040. So if your child is 5 years old in 2030, when you fill out the census and you get that first allocation, then your child, if your community does not fill out that census, you are going to be locked into an artificially low resource distribution for 10 years, which means your kid is going to go from kindergarten to like 10th, 11th grade before they're able to get a shot at having a better allocation of resources for their education. So yeah, it could be the racism. Absolutely. We acknowledge that racism definitely plays a role when it comes to the distribution of resources, but it's also that our communities are not aware that these systems function the way that they function. And so we end up not understanding how we play ourselves. And this has very real world impacts. And we see it every day. If you've been anywhere, like say at a stadium, some large gathering space, and there's very bad cell phone service, chances are the last time the census was being completed, that stadium did not exist, or the people who were filling out the census were not thinking about the stadium. And I'm getting a little complicated. I don't want to overdo it. But when you're in a community like that, where the stadium did not exist the last time the census was filled out, every time you draw thousands of people to that stadium, those thousands of people were not contemplated in the previous census. And cell phone towers are largely distributed in part as a result of census numbers. I often talk about in the last census cycle, and I'll continue to do so, when I'm walking through the neighborhood with my children and we're eating popsicles in the summer, because that's what we do. We love popsicles. When we're doing that and we want to throw the popsicles away, and we don't want to throw it on the ground because that's trashy, and we believe in keeping a clean neighborhood, because in Bedford-Stuyvesant, the census population count was sufficiently low that you might walk 3, 4, 5 blocks before you find a trash can to be able to to throw away your garbage, because trash cans and trash pickup is also provided for as in part as a function of the census. And so when you're going into white neighborhoods and they got trash cans on every fucking corner, it's not because they're special, and it might not be because of the racism, although it's always often racism is a thing. It's largely because they're filling out the census in ways that demonstrate that they deserve those trash cans. And so these very real concrete realities are why it is that right now I am at a Census Day press conference, and I'm there with a number of other organizers and community-based organizations to encourage our state officials to pour money into the census, because the ability to get out the count and to make sure that all of our community members are counted it requires resources. Think about the story I told you about Andrew Cuomo in the previous segment. And I have to be able to raise money to put my team out on the street so that our community knows about the census, they're aware about it, and that we are also considering and planning all the ways that the Trump administration is trying to manipulate this survey to keep people from being counted on it. And considering that the stakes are higher than ever before. So I really do ask, and I need all of you, now that you're aware of this thing, I need you to ask yourself today, who is talking about the census in your community? Today is Census Day. Yes, it's April Fool's Day, but it is Census Day. Are there people and leaders in your community talking about this today? Have you heard about a complete count committee? Complete count committees are basically these community-based committees that basically allow you to gather together the key stakeholders from throughout your community to make sure that all of your sectors, your community sectors, are going to be represented in census conversations. And these are committees that are compiled of trusted voices who can be ambassadors for census information and make sure that the information is being shared into communities that are often forgotten. And while, again, you're thinking, Lurie, it's 2026, we got time. Baby, we don't have time. I do this work, okay? Some of you are hearing about the census for the very first time. Trust me when I tell you I do this work. We do not have the capacity to wait. And so that is why, instead of being with y'all live right now, although if I've timed this recording correctly, I am probably running through the halls of SiriusXM to get here before we go to the next commercial break so I can finish out the show live. But it's so important that we're aware as to the ways in which these systems operate. We did not create these white people them system. Okay, we did not create this thing. They created it, and we have got to do the best that we can to understand how it works. I also just want to say that the Trump administration is doing everything that they can to destroy confidence in the census. That's why they are trying once again to insert a citizenship question on the census. And it's something that they tried to do this first term, and they're trying to do it again in this second term. And that question about whether or not you're a citizen, which does not matter because the Constitution requires everyone to be counted regardless of citizenship status. But they're trying to put a citizenship question on the census because they want to scare people from filling it out. But the reason that everyone has to be counted on the census regardless of citizenship is because the reality is that elected officials, when they are representing their districts are comprised of citizens and non-citizens. And when if you stop at a traffic light, the traffic light don't know if you're a citizen or not. It just knows how many cars are supposed to be in line for traffic based on the census count numbers from that community. And that traffic light is timed to allow a certain number of cars to go through based on that census data. They don't care if the driver is a citizen or not. That's ridiculous. And so it is important that we are aware of this. It's important that we understand how these systems function. Y'all are going to hear me talk about this probably every April 1st, certainly from now until Census 2030, and many, many days in between as well. I am so tired of seeing us be cheated out of what is rightfully ours simply because we do not understand how to successfully manipulate and engage with the systems that determine the resource distribution for our lives. We deserve better. We deserve to have access to these resources. We are paying for these resources with our tax dollars, and it is high time that we are able to get access to those dollars in terms of benefits. It's time for our elected officials to bring home the bacon. We got to bring home the resources, and one of the best ways for us to do that is to fill out the census. All right. Now, before we get into our commercial break and I get ready to share with you all the other bits of news and whatnot that's happening, I do want to just point out that tables are turning. Tonight, y'all's president is going to have an announcement at 9:00. Now, we don't know what he's going to say. If he's smart, he going to say, America won the war. We pulling out. we ain't gonna war no more. We tired of the war. Like that would be what he would say if he were smart, but he's not that smart. So I don't know what tonight is going to actually be about, but it is important that you are aware that things are happening. Things are shifting. And one of the things that's shifting is, quite frankly, Marco Rubio. And Marco Rubio is shifting from the braggadocious, confident, is he drunk or is he coked out? We don't know. We can't tell, Marco Rubio, to being the Marco Rubio who constantly looks like he's strung out on something. Right? He is shifting even as we speak, but he is also whining. And you guys may recall, I think I'd played this clip before, but I'm playing it again because it's I'm doing it to share with you a pattern. Marco Rubio is the tell when it comes to how the administration is actually faring in the war. And while everyone else is like, oh, it's fine, America's amazing. We get all the things. We win all the things. We win all the battles. Do you see how amazing we're doing militarily? And it will be left to like a Donald Trump to acknowledge, yeah, so about that Gerald Ford, they whooped our ass and we had to come racing home. Like, he'll spill the beans, but everybody else is sort of on the same page. Now, what's been interesting about this is you listen to this clip. This is Marco Rubio basically whining about the fact that the U.S. Or that Iran is planning to permanently control the Strait of Hormuz and charge a toll. We've been talking about this. And this whole idea that the Strait of Hormuz is closed is very interesting because it's a whole lot of people who are passing through the Strait of Hormuz, a whole lot of countries passing through the Strait of Hormuz. It's the Americans who are not passing through the Strait of Hormuz. And you're going to hear Marco Rubio in this clip once again talk about the fact that he's stressing over the fact that Iran plans to permanently control the Strait of Hormuz. And he is now asking the rest of the world, at least he was on the day that this clip came out, asking the rest of the world to step in so that Iran cannot be the victor in this moment. All right, take a listen to this clip, and then we're going to unpack this on the other side. This is hubris. This is hubris. Let's hear it.
The Strait of Hormuz tolling thing, they want to make it permanent. That's unacceptable. The whole world should be outraged by it. We're impacted by it a little bit, but the rest of the world is impacted by it a lot more, including many of the countries represented today here at the G7. And so if those countries are deeply impacted by it, all we've said is, you guys need to do something about it. We'll help you, but you guys are going to need to be ready to do something about it. Because when this conflict and when this operation ends, if the Iranians decide, well, now we control the Straits of Hormuz, and you can only go through here if you pay us, and if we allow you to, that's not only is it illegal under international law and maritime law, it's unacceptable. And that can't be allowed to exist. And so what we've said is that the countries that are most impacted by that should be willing to do something about it, and we'll help them. And that's what I said.
Now, this is very, very rich. Okay, this is very, very rich. Marco Rubio representing the nation that got all this shit started, right? You know the phrase, don't start now, won't be none. Marco Rubio done got all this shit started. And now he's saying, wait a minute. The Iranians are saying they're going to keep the strait. Somebody should do something about that. Even though the strait was fully open and nobody had any of these problems before the Americans got involved, now that the Americans involved, somebody should do something. Right. The time to do something was before y'all decided to stick your foot in your ass and the other foot in your mouth and then pretend like you could convince us that you knew what the hell you was doing. But what's happening now is an even further realignment of the entire international global relationships. What we have in America, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of military bases in countries all across the world. And that's basically so that we can maintain surveillance, so that we can continue, spying on people and making sure that we are manipulating their governments in the way that is going to be advantageous to the Americans. I keep saying we here. That's a mistake. I ain't got shit to do with this. It's the white people. It's the Americans, right? But what has been part and parcel of America's power all over the globe has been these moments where basically America runs everything. And for some reason, Marco Rubio seems to think that